Welcome to Falcon Central Radio, guys, part of the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman, joined by my co-host, Matt Carrolley. Tonight, we have a special guest with us, the czar of the playbook. You know him from Football Game Plan. A lot of content that he puts out in terms of football, Giant stuff, draft stuff. Of course, we've had him as a previous guest on this show. Welcome back to the show, Emory Hunt.
Hey, man, I appreciate you guys having me on.
Well, Emory, you're the hardest working man in the draft biz, so we figured that we would have you, come on, talk with us about some of the Falcons' top draft picks, some of the guys that maybe you can share a little bit more insights with our listeners. And we're going to kick things off by talking about your I should say your number two guy. I was going to say number one, but apparently he's your number two guy in terms of overall prospect, Chris Linstrom. He's been a player that you've been following for several years since his high school days. Share with the listeners what kind of player are the Falcons getting with Chris Linstrom?
Man, he's excellent. He's been a fundamentally sound player since high school. Grew into his body and was consistent as far as technique and what he brought to the table at Boston College. And great for him to go to Boston College and get coached by their within their program. And, just watching him over the course of 4 years be consistent was very impressive. The game I was at this past season, I was at the Miami game, and he gave Gerald Willis fits in that ball game. So, that's prospect versus prospect, pro versus pro. And Linstrom just consistently, I thought on tape, just checked all the boxes and graded out really well for me. That's why he graded out high. He graded out with the same grade that I had on Gabe Jackson. I want to say in 2014, he was my number 2 or number 1 prospect in that class, I believe. So I was really high on Gabe Jackson, and Linstrom was right up there. I won't say with the same grade he got from me. So he was impressive on tape. I thought it was a great addition for the Falcons.
Emory, you mentioned Lindstrom as a technician, and I absolutely agree with that assessment. Were you at all surprised, though, with how well he tested as an athlete at the Combine? Because I know me and Aaron have had conversations, and I didn't necessarily see the athleticism, pop on tape like that. But, for you, were you surprised at all by that?
Not at all, because you got to remember, I've known him or of him since his high school days when he was 235 pounds. So I've seen him move around like a tight end. When he was coming out of high school, he was worried that, teams were not looking at him or taking him seriously as a offensive line prospect because he was 235 and, he was going to grow into his weight. He just didn't see it yet. And so seeing him move like that as a high schooler and then seeing him pack on the weight and still be able to have some success in that offensive line. And again, Boston College doesn't put their offensive linemen on the move. It's straight power. So you didn't really get to see it at Boston College, but you'll see a lot of it in the NFL. He's a very good athlete.
Now, Emory, you sort of cover a lot of teams in the New York area, and Linstrom is joining a pretty crowded room at that guard position in Atlanta after the team brought in guys like Jamon Brown and James Carpenter. I'm sort of curious, before we talk about maybe Lindstrom's ability to maybe leapfrog some of those guys on the depth chart, what are your thoughts on guys like Brown and Carpenter and what they bring to the table for the Falcons?
I think Brown is good depth, and I think that's the spot where Linstrom is going to go in. He's going to start right away on the right side. Carpenter, I thought, had some success in New York. We all remember when he got drafted by Seattle, kind of found his way with the Jets, and I thought he played really solid football up here in New York. So I would say he's probably more along the lines to jump Brown as opposed to jumping Carpenter.
You kind of took the question right out of my mouth, Emory. As far if you were calling the shots, you would have Linstrom be the right guard and Carpenter be the left guard then, huh?
Absolutely, because you want Linstrom to continue to do what he did in college. He was on that right side, and I think that's where he thrives. And I think that's where the Falcons are probably most vulnerable. So you want to plug your first-round pick in there right there and allow him to have success right off the bat.
You mentioned Gabe Jackson as a guy that you had a similar grade to, but is there maybe a pro player that you look at and you can tell our listeners, because everybody loves the player comps, but is there a sort of a comparison for our listeners to basically say, okay, this is the type of player that maybe Chris Lindstrom can grow into, or maybe the type of player that you already think he is right now?
You could probably look at Gabe Jackson. I know people are probably down on Jackson right now, but for the last prior to this past season, he was one of the top guards in the league, and so I think he's still of that same ilk. And I think when you allow Lindstrom to be a little bit more athletic as far as getting him out on the move, he'll show you his full array of what he brings to the table. If people want a more contemporary, he's probably not quite the athlete as Braden Smith, who I also had a really high grade on, who ended up starting for the Colts and being a fixture on the offensive line. But Lindstrom, to me, brings the same type of technical ability to the position.
Emory, what can you tell us about John Kaminsky? Being a D2 prospect, there's not a lot out there on him, and he's one of the more polarizing prospects in this class just because, again, the Falcons traded up for him. He's a guy that has, insane athletic, ability, but coming from a D2 school, what can we make of him in 2019? Do you think he can contribute in 2019, or is he about a year or two away from really making a difference on this Falcons team?
I think he's probably a year away. Right now, he's probably more Brooks Reed than anything. I think when you look at Kaminsky, again, just like Lindstrom, high school quarterback, so he has some athleticism, still trying to get used to carrying all that weight. And when you watch them play, you kind of notice Cousin Daniels was a little bit more explosive. Kaminsky is a little bit more stout, has some good athleticism, but he's going to have to get up to speed on the consistency of the talent that he's going to face at the NFL level with carrying all that new weight. So yeah, it's going to take him a year to get that under control. Right now, he's probably going to be a spot player, situational guy, which isn't bad because again, you allow him to do the one thing he can do well, which is pressure the quarterback. But you don't want him out there on a down in, down out basis when you don't know if he can handle the rigors of the consistency of the level of talent that he's going to face. Now, he could surprise all of us in preseason and show that he can, and that's going to push him up the depth chart. But right now, I think he's more of a spot player, more of a situational rusher. He's going to, star on special teams initially while earning more reps in the regular defense.
Now, Kaminsky was a player that sort of was making the jump in the Senior Bowl, and you're a guy that's been covering the Senior Bowl several years in a row now. And I'm just curious to sort of get your thoughts on whether Kaminsky was able to show that coming from that, D2 University of Charleston school, at the level of competition was, did he live up to that at the Senior Bowl, or did he look like a guy that was a little bit overmatched at times?
I thought he kind of fit in. He kind of just looked like guys that were supposed to be there. However, what you did see was the fact that he didn't have the technical skill, the savvy to counteract someone that's going to beat him at his first move. So that's why he has to probably, quote unquote, redshirt a year, get used to what's going on, develop a counter move, develop a plan B. And if he can get that, then he can be successful.
So this offseason was kind of a turnover of sorts in the cornerback room, parting ways with Robert Alford, letting Brian Poole go to New York Jets. So they needed to add some depth there to the cornerback room. They did so on day 3. They brought in Kendall Sheffield in round 4 and then followed it up in round 5 with Jordan Miller. What are your takes on those two players, and which do you think has the edge as far as impacting sooner rather than later in 2019?
I thought both guys were solid depth guys. If I had to pick one that could be more impactful, it would be Sheffield, because I think he's a fantastic athlete, probably best as a slot corner. And right now, that's probably where the Falcons have the biggest hole. I know they can moonlight DeMonte Casey in a slot if they wanted to, but Sheffield, I think, fits that role to a T. Miller is coming from a really good program. You can't go. I hate using this term, but because everybody's individual is an individual, but you can't go wrong with the Washington DB. Just like you can't go wrong with a Wisconsin lineman. I know that's blasphemous to say here in Atlanta. I know you guys had the Karimi deal, but Kansas State is another place you can't go wrong with an offensive lineman. But defensive backs, I'll trust what they do out there in the Pacific Northwest. But I would probably say Sheffield, because he can match up right away athletically with the slot receivers that he's going to face in the league.
Now, you sort of mentioned DeMonte Casey, another guy that you were very high on back in that 2017 draft, and sort of the last couple of years, the Falcons have sort of had him playing more of a safety role. And as you mentioned, he's going to be expected this year to sort of drop down and be more of a true nickel cornerback. I'm curious, do you feel, high enough on a guy like Sheffield that he can immediately challenge Casey for that starting job, or do you sort of see this is, Casey's going to, finally get the opportunity to maybe shine at the role that maybe once upon a time you envisioned him in?
I think it's going to be the latter. I think KZ can shine in that role because he has pro experience. And right now, Sheffield is still a rookie and, coming off that pec injury that he suffered at the combine. So you want to bring him along slowly. He's a 4th-round pick. So you don't want to ruin his opportunity to get out there and make an impact. So you have the luxury of bringing him along slowly because you have such a versatile guy in KZ that can do multiple things. And he's just a phenomenal guy to have out there in the secondary. Is something I truly value is ball skills. And we've seen it time and time again. KZ either punching the ball out, finding the football, making a play on it, taking the ball away. Those type of players you want out there consistently in any type of capacity.
Last question from me, Emory. Any undrafted free agents pique your interest that landed in Atlanta this past weekend?
Well, that right there, I haven't had the chance to look at because, when you look at, for me, it's about guys that are signing these tryouts. And so I want to make sure I have the full-fledged list. I know I just put up an article on The Athletic, and I brought up Zacchaeus out of Virginia. That's probably the one guy right now on offense that I would say keep an eye on him because he does a lot of what you guys had in Taylor Gabriel. You could put him in the backfield. You could put him in the slot. He was a game breaker. I was at the Pitt, Virginia game to see if you're a 5th-round draft pick, and he didn't play because of an injury, which allowed Darren Hall to go off. It was a torrential downpour in Charlottesville, and they tried to get the ball to Zacchaeus, but Pitt's defense was able to answer the call, and Darren Hall ended up running out the stadium for the tune of 200-something yards. But we saw in the bowl game how important Zacchaeus was to Virginia's offense, and he, what a way to end his college career. I think I was surprised he didn't get drafted because of his versatile skill set. And you talk about playing in a division where you have a Curtis Samuel, where you have guys that can do more than one thing or multiple things. He can be that guy for Atlanta. You talk about an Alvin Kamara, not saying he's Alvin Kamara's talent, but he's a guy that can serve as a slot receiver, serve as a 3rd down back that you leak out in the flat or even give a quick draw to or something like that. So I would say just right now, as we're talking on May 2nd, keep an eye on Zacchaeus, Alameda Zacchaeus out of Virginia. But as I fully dive into the undrafted free agents that you guys have, and within this next week, I'll have a better idea of there's probably gonna be like a bunch of guys that I like undrafted wise because I'm usually like that every year, and that's why I added to the draft class because to me that is part of the draft. That's the quote unquote 8th round, and teams sometimes have better hauls in the undrafted department than they do in the actual draft. So give me about a week and a half to really dive into it. But right now I would say Alameda Zacchaeus out of Virginia.
Well, you talk about getting that deep dive, Emory, and I guess it's time to go ahead and plug all the places where people can get your content, whether they want to go back through your rankings, want to get, whatever you have upcoming, and maybe what some of those projects, in addition to what you just spoke on, are going to be.
Sure. They can follow me on Twitter at FBallGamePlan. If you want to check out all 767 of my prospect grades and rankings, go to footballgameplan.com/FBGP scouting. Or you could just go to youtube.com/footballgameplan. That's where you can see all of our prospect videos, player interviews from the pro day circuit. You can also catch up this weekend. We'll be on, I'll be at Giants camp. So you'll have all kind of video coverage from there, as well as player interviews and recaps. So, and also we've done a lot of interviews as well, not only on video, but also on our Football Game Plan podcast network. So search Football Game Plan Podcast on iTunes. Check out the Scout Team podcast where you see all these player interviews. And we've done a great job across the board this whole draft season, starting from the East-West Bowl up in Quebec City, Quebec in Canada to, the East-West Shrine Games, Senior Bowl, College Gridiron Showcase, Tropical Bowl, FCS Bowl, and National Bowl. So we was at about a good, I want to say 6 or 7 college all-star games. this year. So we got all those player interviews from there, practice highlights, so you can see some of these guys if you hadn't seen them before. So you can catch all of that content at footballgameplan.com or on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/footballgameplan.
Emory, we appreciate you joining us tonight, talking about the Falcons draft class, and look forward to chatting with you probably, next spring, getting geared up for the 2020 draft class. And I know you're going to dive right back into that very shortly this summer to get prepared for that. So I look forward to seeing your content throughout the summer and the fall, gearing up for next year's draft class.
Appreciate you guys, man. Always a pleasure to jump on and talk shop with you guys.
Thanks, Emory.